Welcome, everyone. I would like to welcome you to our webinar today, Inclusion in Education. Before we get started, I would like to ask you if you could please do a few housekeeping rules. And one would be to take your camera and put it up to the screen and to use our QR codes. And those will be, one will be for the training sign in. And then one will be able to have a survey, if you would please fill that out for us. And one is also for your certificate at the end of the webinar. We will put this screen back up once we are finished with the webinar today. But if you wouldn't mind just taking a minute or two and getting those little things done, then we can proceed while we're allowing everyone to come in. And I would like to introduce myself. My name is Jill Summerlot, and I am the webinar coordinator for InSource. And I would like to introduce my co-host, Lisa Paddock.
Hi, everyone. Welcome today to our webinar on the importance of inclusive education. My name is Lisa Paddock. I'm one of the assistant directors today, and we are welcoming you to learn more about the benefits of inclusive education. We'll talk about some myths and reality and the benefits of having kids together in their least restrictive environment. So we're so glad that you could join us today.
I would like to point out that I did post in our chat box to everyone our information. It is also a link to those QR codes. It also gives you our email, our phone number. It gives you further resources on our website. It also gives you information on how to find our staff, our youth training, and it also has for our archived webinars. It also has a link to our calendar and to our YouTube channel. But I also have put in our question and answer box. I have also put that information as well. Throughout the training, if you have any questions, any comments, please feel free to use our question and answer box or use our chat box, whatever you feel that best serves you. We are out on Facebook Live as well, and I would like to invite our Facebook Live viewers to please post all of your questions there. We do have Jessica Terry is going to be monitoring that for us today. And so again, if you have any questions, please feel free to post your questions or comments. Okay, so at this time, we are going to get into our presentation. And if you give me just 1 second, I'm not sure if nope, I didn't do it right. So please bear with me. Oh, you know what? I love technology. Here we go. I may have done it correctly now. Again, today we're going to be discussing the importance of inclusion. Now, again, it is one of those things that, you know, we would help if I probably shared my screen, that we really have to make sure that we are including everyone in our educational process, if that makes any sense. I don't know why I'm having so many problems. There we go. I'm so sorry. So we want to just talk about that inclusion. So again, my name is Jill Summerlot. I've been with InSource. This is my 22nd year. And as I said earlier, I am the webinar coordinator. So let's just kind of go through, just if you don't mind, a few little housekeeping rules again. We do have our QR code that's going to be up here. If you haven't had the opportunity to get that to come up for you, I would really appreciate that if you would take care of that. Again, I have posted these things in our chat box, so let me do that as well again. All righty. So let's also have our little legal disclaimer that we have. As many of you know, we are not attorneys. We don't pretend to be an attorney. If you have any questions that you would need any legal advice from, please feel free to seek a competent educational attorney. That is one of your rights as a parent as well. Right. So our mission at InSource, our mission is that we are grant funded. We're a parent organization. We are part of a national network. We are the Parent and Training Information Center for the state of Indiana. Every state in the United States must have at least one. Most of our InSource employees, we are parents or have a family member that has a disability. And all of our services are free at no charge to parents. So how do we help? And you know, if you've been with InSource for a long time, you know that we have several ways that we do support families. And one of those ways is just assistance by phone, by email. We do training classes, we do training webinars, just like you're in today. We do at times, if we can, put it on our schedules. In each individual person that works for InSource has their own schedule. If we can allow it, we attend those school meetings with you. We do work with both families and schools so that we work together, and we try to make sure that we have those discussions on those transition age students. And we also have training on self-advocacy. And we have that special education training for school interpreters. And again, if you have any questions or you would like to look at any other information, you're more than welcome to use our website at insource.org. So what criteria must children with disabilities meet to be included in general education? There is none. And so we really want to make sure that we understand that there is no criteria. We will know that to be included in general education, it means that general education classrooms are working with the general education curriculum. And I'm sure that you've heard that with being a parent or a provider that is in the educational system. You've heard of general education, you've heard of special education. The curriculum is going to be what the student without special needs would use and to learn from. And so to be included for that criteria, we do not have to meet any special criteria for a student to achieve that. So I would like to invite you to think about that question on what criteria there really is. And if you just kind of pause and think about that for a minute, really the bottom line of inclusion is there's a lot of details to know about inclusion. So we're really going to talk and dive deep into that today. And it's going to be one of those enlightening things that I hope that you take away from today. All righty. So what are we going to learn? We're going to learn what the definition of inclusion is. We're going to learn about the benefits of inclusion, and we are going to be able to talk about that. And I'm telling you what. So when we're going to also talk about how that's going to be, how that pairs with our federal and our state laws. So inclusion defined is so what does inclusion mean? Let me just try and gather my thoughts, and I do apologize. I seem to be struggling with the computer right now, and I don't know if you guys can see it or not, but I do apologize. So what does inclusion mean? If we go and we look into the Webster Dictionary, it means wisdom says that inclusion is the act of being included within a group or structure. And so we can take that one step further. And I know that I'm probably going to say some things today that are going to help you to kind of understand what that inclusion means. and be able to maybe even go a little bit deeper into that. So if someone tells me, when you think of the word with, that means inclusion is being with one another. It's a relationship if you think about it. So, when we talk about that inclusion part, it's being with others. It's having those relationships that go along with that inclusion. And someone may just say one word that might hear as care. This is simply talking about caring for one another. It can mean a combination of things. We want to talk about being involved, because when you think about inclusion, it also means being involved, being together. It's about encouraging everybody. It's about being able to fully participate at what that person's capacity is, because each one of us have a different capacity of what being involved is. When we think about the word partners, it implies equality. It's one of those things that when you think about a partner, you're equal. You're thinking about being in a relationship where what I think, what I say matters. And so that would be part of inclusion. Also, the word membership. When you think about membership, it's a part of something. You're supporting someone. You're being a part of. It's like your YMCA membership or your gym membership. You're being a part. You're being in a group. You're supporting one another. Another word would be value. And so whenever we think of like the value, we think of maybe like a gift. That gift is very valuable to us. And as a contributor, we're valued, and that value comes across as being appreciative. So now that we've said all of these words, the care, the involved, the partners, the membership, the value, inclusion is a big word that conveys a lot of those different meanings. Inclusion conveys the idea that we appreciate each other, we see each other's gifts, we value being together, and inclusion speaks to the importance of relationships. And a relationship is something that we value with every single person, every part of our community. It's something that we know that we're going to be a part of. And we all know that when we're a part of any of those, whether it be the word value or membership or partner and care, that makes us feel like we're good. It makes us feel like that we are valued and that we matter. So when we talk about inclusion a little bit further, the fact of being included is within that group or structure. Those are what goes along with those words, that care, that membership, and that partner. So what is inclusion? And really the whole purpose behind inclusion is to have that is those special classes, those separate schoolings, or other removals of children with disabilities. There are, when we talk about in just Article 7, the supplementary aids and services defined, and that it would be under your, and I might say some citations today, and they are included in that packet that when you use that QR code that you do get. And so when we talk about those supplemental aids and services, they're provided in general education. They're provided in related settings. They can be provided in that extracurricular or those non-academic settings. And so that would be able to enable students with disabilities to be educated with their non-disabled peers. So an example would be a paraprofessional assistant, a nurse, something on those lines. So that would be something that whenever you talk about what inclusion is, that's part of that. And being able to have that range of accommodations, those modifications, and any of those services that would be available to our kids, especially the ones that would be in those inclusive settings. So the part of the inclusion is to the maximum extent appropriate, students are to be educated in the general education setting. And we do know that that is where our kids are really best served, is to be there. We know that part of that inclusion can happen. We when we need those special services, we need those special supports, and they can't be provided in that general education classroom. So again, those special education classes, they can be separate schooling. They can be maybe a removal of children with disabilities from that regular educational setting. And again, if we go back to part of what that word inclusion means, it means to be included. It means to be a partner. It needs to be together. It means to have those relationships. So we also covered that would be part of those. You would have that supplementary aids and services that can be made. They can be in the general education setting. That can be somebody that, again, is like that nurse, that one-on-one assistant, and that person that can be supplementary, that can be part of that child and to help with that, any of those processes in that gen ed classroom. So what you're looking at now is the images that these are 4 different models that, and the colored dots represent children with special needs. So what we're looking at here is the inclusion, segregation, exclusion, and integration. So when you talk about inclusion, the first one here up on the top, inclusion, that particularly one is where, again, everybody is together. That is where everybody, again, that partnership is for you. That partnership from that child. Exclusion, it means that, our kids right here, they're watching from the outside looking in, and the activities, they're not accessible. And there's no supports put into place so that they can be a part of that. And then if you look over here at the segregation, that's a complete different separate classroom. That is where they're right here. There's no interaction, if very little. And so they're not only over here with exclusion looking inward, they aren't even looking. So they're completely away from everybody. So we have integration right here. Now, this is where your children with special needs, they're physically located in that general education classroom. They may be off to the side a little bit. They may be in the back of the classroom working on something completely different from what their general education peers that are right out here doing. Okay, so it could be something completely unrelated. So then again, let's go back to the top up here, inclusion. This is where all of the kids are together. This is where everybody is incorporated in that general education classroom. Students with or without special needs, they're all right there. They have all those supports, all those services, all of those accommodations are what they are getting right here in order to help them progress towards those goals. And this right here is where they're going to have all of those unique needs met. So let's talk a little bit about myth versus research. Okay, so what we have here is my child needs a separate class in order to learn. So I just want you to be very aware, and that this is, this is something that, again, if this is myth versus research, and it says that my child needs a special class to learn. So we need to understand about why your child would need a separate classroom to learn. Okay, so what we want to do is, in order for the studies have shown that there's been no late studies since the 1970s that there have shown academic advantage for students with intellectual and other developmental disabilities that are educated in the classroom. And that was in 2004. So you can imagine, we do know that research shows children do not show, they don't show a lot of need for that in certain buildings. In fact, research actually shows that there are no real advantages to a self-contained classroom. It's one, we have the study here that's quoted here that there have not been any research, again, since the 70s to show that that would be academically or socially strong enough for them to be educated in that classroom. So we do have to go back to those research and those studies. And, I have to tell you that in the 1970s, I started school. Boy, this is going to show my age, but I started school in 1969. And so, when I started school, that was what you did. You had a separate classroom. The kids were in the back of the building. You didn't know. I didn't know until I was in high school until that what even that was, because I had never been exposed to anybody like that in my building. So we know that the relationship between special education placement and academic outcomes, we know that Dr. Cole has been conducting a research on inclusion, and this has been over her whole career. And so recently, Dr. Cole and Dr. Hardy Murphy of IU studied the impact on the simple act of including students with disabilities in that general education classroom. And so whenever they were going through this, they were keeping all the variables comparable between the groups. So like the ability levels, the demographics, Dr. Cole was able to demonstrate a significant difference in the performance of the two groups, of those who had been included performing at a higher level than their peers. So do you have any ideas on why this might be so? And if you do, please feel free to drop them in the question and answer box or in our chat box at any time, because the work that was published, this was published in 2020 in the Journal of Special Education. And so the researchers compared the academic outcomes of these students and their cohorts from Indiana. And so they were placed in a high and low inclusion settings. And the student scores in the two settings from the Indiana State were compared to from 4th grade to 2014 through their 8th grade in 2018. So there was some real definite studies that went into this and some very hard work that went into this. And so the results of this study showed that students with disabilities who spent 80% or more of their time in the general education inclusive classroom did significantly better in both reading and math than their peers who spent more time in separate special education classrooms. So whether or not there was an understanding of the power of inclusion, this was some actual research that came out to demonstrate that there was a huge impact that was a part of this. And so it's very convincing that our kids need to be included. They need to be in those classrooms. They don't need to be in a separate setting.
Jill, if I could interrupt here, we do have a comment. And this user was stating presuming competence and watching peers learn and that modeling are two big reasons students do better in general education, which is what the studies showed when they compared a more restrictive environment to a general ed environment. So I wanted to add that.
Yes. And thank you very much, because Mindy, thank you very much, because that is very much, you are spot on. And we know that, and even thinking further outside of that, even if you start to look at disability categories and knowing that there are certain areas that do need that peer-to-peer, they need to be able to do that modeling. And so it's really important that they do have that component to their day. So thank you so much, Mindy, for bringing that out. Okay. And again, please feel free to put all of your comments in there. I really welcome them. So as you see on the screen, we do know that access to the content, the material, we know that through this study that Dr. Cole had went through, and that our research has shown that this is exactly what our kids need. So let's talk a little bit about more myths versus research. So my child needs a self-contained classroom. Okay, so we're talking about that a little bit more. She feels safe and comfortable there. So we know that we have to be very aware, because whenever we start talking about those self-contained classrooms, we know that, as the citation will be, that, and please bear with me, Dubus and Barclay, J.W. Holmes, Platt, and Shea did a research in 2009 in the fall, and it was, does inclusion help students present perspectives from regular education and students with disabilities? And so this was put in the Journal of American Academy of Special Education Professionals. And so we know that the research here shows that just by being in a regular classroom, children with special needs have better self-esteem. I think that that is a very good thing to be thinking about. And we know being included is empowering. Again, let's go back to those definitions and what inclusion means. Again, we have that self-esteem, we have that that care part, we have those that empowerment, you know, because that's what you get whenever you are in a partnership or, you know, a membership. You do start to become included, and that is part of being empowering, because that part of learning. So that is always going to be a huge component. But it also addresses that basic human need for contact and exchange and to be in that community. And again, that goes hand in hand with those words that we started out in the beginning with: membership, partnership. So all of that comes in hand. This also addressed our national curiosity about each other and just the world around us. So this was something that was very valued. And because as a presence, we know that we're valued and we're valuable. Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't take those, so I thought somebody else had put something in there. So again, let's go through another myths versus research, number 3. So again, I just want you to be aware that the slide displays first some pretty tough things. So having
And
students with
Jill, I am sorry to interrupt you. I am trying to put some of these citations in for you.
Okay, thank you so much, Lisa.
Sure.
Appreciate that. And I do, and please forgive me because I completely can butcher these names. But I think it's very important that you understand where these studies have come from and how you can access them and have the ability to be able to also find them and read them yourself. So having, you know, having students with disabilities in classes with typical students will keep the typical students from learning. It's hard. That one is hard. And, you know, if you have a child with a disability, or you are a provider with a child with a disability, or you are a professional teacher or in that arena, this is just a hard statement to just read. It really was for me because whenever I read this, it just really tears at my heart. So let's talk about the citation. Let's talk about where this came from. So this was a study that was done in August of 2016, and it was done by Hare, Brindall, Freeman, Lamore, Reek, and Burke. And so this was a summary of evidence for inclusive education. And this was done at Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so this is something that, again, is very hard to, you know, talk about because you don't want to hear this. So we're going to flip the coin a little bit. So maybe other people believe that kids of all abilities in the same learning environment keeps some children from learning well. So I'd be curious to know about what you guys think. If you want to go ahead and put that in the box as well, because we know that research absolutely shows that this is a myth. This is false. Looking at the research, we know that performance is either a good or even better for typical kids when they're educated with children with special needs. And we know that research shows this to be true in elementary school and middle school. And it was across all grades, typical kids do better when educated inclusively. It's one of those things that when my son, and I'll just take this to a personal level, when my son started school, I wanted him to be included because I wanted him to grow up. He'd already been in preschool, but I wanted him to grow up with other kids that he was in the neighborhood with. I wanted him to have them to all have that exposure, because to be excluded from that really isn't the real world. And I wanted them to all grow up together so that they knew that there was nothing scary about any of this, but he learned from them and they learned from him. And so again, having students with disability in classes with typical students will keep the typical students from learning. That is so false, because again, the research shows that that is not true, that we know that across the board, it works out better. Their performance is better. And again, we have that modeling that we can go off of. So let's do a couple more. Having students with disabilities. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. So myth versus research number 4. A typical child will learn bad behaviors from students with disabilities. Again, this is the research shows that not only do typical students not learn bad behaviors, they actually learn about themselves. Again, that goes back to, we know that they are included. It's one of those things that they're going to build self-esteem. They're going to have relationships. They're going to have partnerships. They're going to have memberships. They're going to be cared about. So what happens if the school says that a child's behavior is problematic and that the child cannot be included? So we know one way to respond to that is that the child does not have to perform or behave to be entitled to have an education. So let me say that one more time. We know that a child does not have to perform or behave to be entitled to an education. So how else will the child ever develop those skills if we don't give them a chance and support them? So it's one of those things that we have to make sure that students without disabilities have that same exposure to all of this. Let's go back to their self-esteem. We know that they will have more self-esteem. They're going to have better relationships. They're going to have better partnerships. And we also have to remember that IDEA, as that law, prefers that children be educated together in that general education classroom. And so we have to make all of those necessary accommodations or modifications or whatever that case conference committee has deemed to be needed for that child. We have to make sure that all of those things are determined in that IEP and that the team has come together and to make those decisions. Because again, we want to make sure that we're all included, and the school has to provide those supports. And this even would be if they needed to develop a behavior plan. If you do have a child that has those some behaviors that are coming out, then we need to have those conversations about that functional behavioral assessment. Do we need to look at an FBA? Do we need to then look at a BIP, one of those a behavioral intervention plan? What does that look like for that child? Okay. So let's try another one. So what if parents don't want a child with disabilities in their classroom? Well, I have to tell you that I have had that conversation. And it was not a pleasant conversation when you have somebody walk up to you and say, I don't want your child in my classroom. My child won't learn. Well, I have news for you. There is another citation, and this is a 2009 citation, A Different Perspective on Conclusion. And this was done by a person by A. Hill. And so research says that over time, parents of typical kids see the benefit of inclusion. So they have inclusive placement is strongly supported by IDEA. The law does include this, and it gives options for tools and support and services for any of those children with disabilities. Here's a sample from a former special education teacher. So let me just read this to you. She tells a great story of partnering with a general education second grade teacher for reading. They designed a program that would benefit all of the students. Students moved in groups through activities and centers. And can you guess what happened? The students helped each other. The students became friends. It just happened naturally because of the inclusive environment. And the students also flourished academically. Those that were struggling weren't struggling anymore at the end of the year. Test scores were up, and this was all due to students had the ability to learn and work together. So what a wonderful, example of how this is to work. And so we know that we're moving into the benefits of inclusion. And so, we talk a lot about why it won't work or why it can't work. But the reality is that there are benefits for all children to be in an inclusive environment. We know that, again, that there's going to be better outcomes. I go back to those original words that we had about membership, partnership, caring, and, all of those things, and the ability to be able to learn from each other, and just like it was pointed out earlier, we have those modelings. So we know that that is going to be a part of that. So it just works out better. And I hope that you're able to look up some of these myths and researches, because I think that once you dive deeper into it and read about it, it's very interesting. It's very thought-provoking. So we are going to be switching now. I'm going to be turning things over to my co-host, Lisa Paddock, but we're going to actually start to see some different parts of this session about research. And so I just want you to keep in mind that there have been, there's no studies that have ever been done that says inclusion doesn't work. And so please keep that in mind. Just think about different ways that we can start to include our kids even more. And so, just think about it just a little bit more. So anyway, I will stop going on, and Lisa, I will stop sharing and let you take this over. I thank you very much. Please, again, if you have any questions or comments, please post this for us.
Thank you, Jill, so much. And we are going to get those citations. We're working on getting those in the chat. And I've posted a couple. I think Jessica's looking. Maybe Jill, if you can look, we want to try to get those citations in. And of course, sometimes technology just does not work the way we want. So at this point, we're going to cross our fingers, and we're going to see if we can learn some about the benefits of inclusion. Okay, so all the way through Jill's part of this presentation, she hit on some very key words, right? And to kind of hone in, those were memberships, knowledge and skills, and relationships, right? So part of what she talked about had to do with these key components of what does inclusion really mean, okay? So we talked about that rationale behind inclusion: belonging to a group, which is membership, building relationships, and learning. And that's knowledge and skills, right? So we're going to take some time to look at benefits and outcomes in each of these areas. And when you take a look at these, you'll see that what's interesting is that these three areas all relate to each other. They're all interconnected. They are not isolated. They don't happen independently of each other. And in essence, these outcomes are inclusive, and in practice, together, they are inclusive. So part of what used to be the thought was the fact that kids with special needs, especially those with significant special needs, since they would need extra assistance, they would maybe even need some modifications. It couldn't be done with the other students. We have moved away from that. We have moved into the value of being a fifth grader, not the outlook of being a fifth grader in a life skills classroom, that inclusion matters, that individuals working together learn from each other, and that kids are kids first. Okay, so we're going to talk about outcomes for everyone. Okay, so membership, as Jill mentioned, is about being accepted. It's about being able to participate in groups. It's about being part of field trip day and not having to have a separate field trip day if that is not absolutely needed. So before I move on, I wanted to talk a little bit about LRE and least restrictive environment. So we do know that there are some kids that are going to need some very, very, very specific intense supports. And for them, their least restrictive environment might look a little more restrictive than others, but we no longer assume that. We come to the case conference table and we look at general education. We look at general education with support, and then more support before we ever think of moving a student out of general education. Okay, so membership can be achieved in many ways in school or a preschool setting. You know, there's interactive play, there's time at the playground, there's school and activities. And here are some of the benefits, some of the things that we talk about. They're going to learn from each other. They're going to build friendships. Okay, we're going to reduce the fear of human differences and increase the comfort and awareness level, okay, of someone being different than you, right? When we talk about being aware, we're talking about developing principles. Children standing up for each other, fighting back against bullying, fighting against discrimination, and standing up for what is right. This is my friend, right? And that's part of where that value comes. They start seeing each other as kids and not as someone who might necessarily have a difference, but that difference can also be appreciated. And so when we start our kids all out together as kids, then they learn from the differences. There's improvement in self-concept. As other research shows, all kids who are educated in an inclusive setting feel better about themselves and have a higher self-esteem. And as we're all a classroom, we all work together to meet each other's needs. And as I mentioned before, building those warm and caring friendships, that is absolutely vital. And the best way to do that is together. We're also going to talk about knowledge and skills and relationships. Okay. So the second benefit or outcome of inclusion deals with relationships. We've just been talking about that. Friendships, more diverse social network, right? This is again about tolerance and acceptance. It ties to valuing differences and recognizing that different doesn't mean bad, it can be great and add so much to relationships. It can also mean increased patience and acceptance of people with and without disabilities, which of course is a wonderful benefit of inclusion. And an increased willingness to help others and to accept help from others when necessary. You've all seen the cartoon about where the person at the school's trying to clear the snow off the steps. And then they said, in a minute, we'll clear off the ramp. And somebody says, if you clear the ramp, we all can use it, right? The child who uses a wheelchair for mobility and the child who walks up the steps of the ramp. So that's really part of what universal design, it's really part of what inclusion speaks to, okay, is that unity. Taking a look at what people do need to be able to access their free and appropriate public education, okay? So we're going to talk a little bit about learning and knowledge and skills. The third benefit deals with the domain of knowledge and skills. And Jill mentioned a little bit accommodations and modifications, and they can be made for children with special needs in mind and benefit for everyone. So I mentioned UDL, Universal Design for Learning. And, you know, it used to be when I started and maybe when Jill started, it was very unusual when we had to have a conversation about why a child would need fidget toys, right? And it was actually even written in the IEP, some of the color coding things. And now most teachers have a basket of fidget toys on their desk. Kids can sit on yoga balls, kids can stand, kids can walk in the back of the room. We have realized that there are different ways of learning, and we have recognized this. So kids with special needs who have IEPs can have accommodations and even some modifications in order to meet their need. Now, when you get to high school to earn credit, you cannot have modifications, okay? You cannot change that grade level of curriculum. But in general, those accommodations and modifications can be made, right? And the things we used to look at as special just for our kids who might have some differing abilities now are pretty universally accepted, okay? Inclusive education settings allow students the opportunity to participate in tutoring program, either as a tutor or the one being tutored. So the child who has some special needs for support can also be the same child that's tutoring someone else, right? And many times there are opportunities to be tutored or to tutor, right? To be the leader in the group. And you don't get that if you have an exclusion type of a setting. The children are not together, and research has shown that students who help others learn increased patience and willingness to help, and we should all be looking at that. That's something all of us need. The presence of therapists like physical therapists and speech therapists and learning specialists help general education teachers individualize instruction. And you might ask why. Well, that's because what can help one child who might have a delay or might be struggling with something can help many children, okay? A great example is a child care setting. When a speech therapist comes in, might help a child who is nonverbal learn some sign language to communicate. The other young children around also can learn sign language and communicate. And you can reinforce learning and teach other children how to communicate, right? So many times some of the related service providers that come in and some of the general ideas that are used and afforded can benefit all kids. So you can see how all three of these benefits are connected. And once a student with special needs is a member of an inclusive educational setting, relationships can form naturally with peers without special needs. And that's what the law talks about, that kids that have IEPs are to be educated to the greatest extent with children who do not have IEPs. Accommodations or modifications may be made for students with special needs, and they may also benefit their typically developing peers. And most of all, students in inclusive settings gain knowledge about each other and share their skills with one another. Okay, so some basic principles. Inclusion can lead to a life where people with disabilities are valued because differences are respected and tolerance exists. Inclusion can lead to a real circle of friends for individuals with special needs. Friends who are there because they want to be there and not because they're their family or their paid staff. And inclusion can lead to individuals with special needs finding his or her own interest, hobbies, and even bigger and more important, dreams, as they listen to other students, what they want to do, and as they are taught grade level curriculum and supported in the areas they need to be supported, then they can think about what they want to do, and their parents can think about the dreams they have for them. And inclusion can lead to a more independent life, okay? Hopefully more independent housing, self-care, and a full and robust choices right in the community. That's what everybody looks for, is to be part of the community, just like everyone wants to be, right? They want to have, everybody wants to look at having a job. Everyone wants to typically look at living independently or with a friend or in a setting they choose, right? To take part in their religious community, to take part in the community activities, right? That's being part of the community, and also competitive employment. And inclusion can lead to a far better and broader employment choices and opportunities. And that is really important to know. When high expectations are set from the very beginning, it helps set the stage for the outcome. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the guiding principles of inclusion, and you will see these listed here. So we're going to summarize these key points. Children with special needs have the right to participate in the same neighborhood and community activities and programs they would attend if they did not have any special healthcare needs or any special learning needs, okay? As a nation, we call this equal opportunity. And it is really important, and it is the foundation of inclusion and of IDEA. Children should have supports they need to be successful and achieve their greatest potential. Children bring their inherent gifts to their community. Everyone has something to contribute. And children with special needs should be afforded the dignity of risk. And sometimes that's hard for parents in general. We don't want any of our children to fail. And if our child has a special healthcare need or learning need, that can be particularly hard because we worry even more about perhaps them failing or being hurt or humiliated. Yet we all learn a lot when something goes wrong and something occurs, and we can walk through those steps. Children with special needs can be afforded the same experience of risk with all the trouble and rewards that go along. As human beings, we learn from making mistakes. We don't necessarily learn not to do something because we're told. We learn and grow by experiencing. And surrounding ourselves with community that supports participation of all children in all aspects of life. And then someone is there to help walk through that scenario, whether it went good or whether it didn't go so good. That's part of learning and part of growing up. Okay, so we're going to talk about the law behind it. Okay, IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And I'm going to read this quote: to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a FAPE, a free and appropriate public education designed to meet their individual needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. Okay, educating children with special needs was a principal objective of Congress in passing Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also known as IDEA. It's the primary federal law protecting the educational rights of students with disabilities. Federal legislation mandates special education for all eligible children in the United States and territories. Many years ago, that was not the law. Children who had special health care needs or special learning needs were not allowed to go to school. Or if they went to school, they only went for a few years because there was not a law that said that they were entitled. So also here in Indiana, we have our state law, and that is Article 7. And state laws can do more, but not less than the federal law. So IDEA is the federal law. Article 7 is our state law. And you can find a copy of that on our website. You can find a copy of that on the Department of Education's website. And you can also find the family-friendly version of that called Navigating the Course on each of those websites. So while IDEA doesn't mandate inclusion per se, it does indicate support for special education to take place alongside and with peers without disabilities. So the local decision comes to the parent in the case conference, but the overall global law says educating with children that do not have disabilities, and this is a requirement. So no matter where you move in the country, IDEA still is the national law. So IDEA may sound simple in its purpose, but it's a big law that ensures that children who have special healthcare needs or special learning needs can access public education and have the accommodations and modifications that they need. So if your child has an IEP, they have protections. And as a parent, it is really important for you to learn what those protections are, to learn about IEPs, to learn about the dispute process, to learn about the evaluation process. And you can find more about that on our website at insource.org. So if your child has an IEP, they have protections. And as a parent, we want you to learn how to understand those options and learn to advocate for your child knowing these laws. So IDEA is an important education law for you to understand. And again, the basics of IDEA or Article 7, you can find those on our website. You can download it and go through. You can even go through trainings that we have about understanding special education. As I mentioned before, though, before 1975, educational services for children with special needs were not protected by federal law at all. And most children were not educated at all, and any service they got because their parent was the one that was able to provide it or provide therapies. So additionally, IDEA starts with a section of findings. And in this section, Congress spells out the rationale for having a law about educating children that have disabilities. And there are many additional findings by Congress in passing IDEA, but this slide quotes the first and most important finding. Disability is a natural part of the human experience and in no way diminishes the right of individuals to participate in or contribute to society. That is just so foundational to someone's existence, that they have a right to go to school, they have a right to participate, to marry, to work and be part of the community. Now, that doesn't mean they might not need supports, right? But we must listen to the student and what they want to do. And we need to ask about what they feel is a good life when we look at being part of a community. So in other words, disability is a natural part of life. Having a disability does not take away from a person's right to take part in or contribute to society. It doesn't lessen it or reduce that right. And that's not all, okay? Congress's finding and IDEA continues with improving educational results for children with disabilities is an essential element of our national policy of ensuring equity of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency for individuals with disabilities. Okay, so if you remember when we were looking at the differences between inclusion and exclusion, and we were looking at those bubbles, right? That really is an example about talking about equal opportunity. Okay, so without equal opportunity, there can be no inclusion. Full participation is definitely a hallmark of inclusion. Independent living, self-sufficiency, ties back to the part of inclusion that we've discussed about not relying on others, but learning to participate and be included to learn a skill, which is also what you look at in goals for IEPs. You're learning a skill. That is part of what the foundation of that special education is, to learn a skill. What does this student need to do to try to help access their FAPE? So how about outcomes? We discuss outcomes about memberships, relationships, skills, and knowledge, right? And so we talked about equal opportunity and full participation. So does anyone have any thoughts at this point? Any questions? Because part of what inclusion is all about is equal opportunity and full participation, so that the student can look toward competitive employment, self-sufficiency, and independent living. Oh, I don't see any questions in the chat or the question and answer, so I'll go on. So I do hope that you see the point of IDEA supporting inclusion, understanding that inclusion requires an equal opportunity to participate, contribute to society, and become self-sufficient. We've only looked at a small portion of part A so far, so imagine right now we're going to step into early intervention for just a moment. First steps is what it's called in Indiana. In different states, it is called something different. In Oklahoma, it's called Sooner Start. In Iowa, it's called Early Access. And in Louisiana, it's called Early Steps. So in Indiana, our Part C is called First Steps, Early Intervention Services. And I used to, many moons ago, be a First Steps service coordinator. And our son took part in First Steps, and it is a wonderful organization. And that is for children that are age birth all the way to their third birthday. And those Part C services, so public schools consider Part B, Part C services, are developmental services that are provided in natural environments to the maximum extent appropriate, including home and community settings in which children without disabilities participate. So for small children, that might be at home, that might be at daycare, that could be at the park, right? So when we think about first steps, then we want to think about the fact that starting early on some of these services helps a child as they approach school age. They may or may not still need special education services, but we know that providing special education and developmental services for children is vital, so that when they do get closer to the age of 3, they will get that evaluation. If parents are choosing to see if they are eligible for special education services in preschool. So first steps and inclusion. So what is your child's natural environment? Okay, so talking just a little bit about that. So Part C services are meant to ensure a healthy and proactive start for children with disabilities. So Part C talks about natural environments. Like I talked about, for a parent that is at home, child might receive services there. For a parent that is working outside the home, childcare. It could be at the park. It could be a variety of different places. What IDEA is laying out right from a child's birth is that even if the child needs something extra, he or she has the right to be in his or her own natural environment. The plans are different from First Steps to public school system. So with First Steps, that child would have an IFSP, an individualized family service plan. And this plan focuses on the whole family. It focuses on the child, but it also includes the family and parents' needs as well. And when this plan is developed and implemented, hopefully the IFSP will really help a family get organized and ready to look towards the future of what are they going to do when their child ages out of the system. Are they interested in an evaluation? Are they not? What are the timeframes for those? The service coordinator fills in all of the information about what they would need to do, what the requirements are to get that evaluation before that child turns and has their 3rd birthday. In early intervention or Part C, we learn about developmental milestones for very young children. So these are things that young children should typically be doing by a specific age. It's very helpful for parents of young children to know those typical milestones for all children, and all children do learn differently. But early intervention services are intended to help a child reach developmental milestones. So maybe there's just a small delay, or maybe there's a more significant. So here in Indiana, a child has to show a 25% delay in one area or 20% in 2. And as we've already talked about, having your young child receive early intervention services in his or her natural environment or setting with other young children results in a positive outcome and benefits that go beyond the child just reaching their milestone. They are in their natural environment. They're learning from their environment. And this is all outlined in federal law. So we always need to think about, to the maximum extent appropriate, your child should receive his or her early intervention services in the environment that's natural to them. Just like once they move into school, they are to be educated in the least restrictive environment. So we're going to make the jump from First Steps to the school system, Part B. So Part B of IDEA is about students with disabilities from ages 3 to 22. And this is the heart of education of your child. And so when a child transitions out of Part C, this is a big switch to go from an IFSP to an IEP if this child qualifies. There are lots of choices. There are timelines. There is paperwork to sign. There are things to understand, right? Parents of children with special needs really need to be proactive about their child's education and about their child's services. So all children are entitled to be educated. So for children with disabilities under IDEA, that education is guided by a plan that's known as an IEP, an individualized education program. And this plan spells out exactly what special education and related services for your child would receive and why. Okay. What are the goals? What are the present levels? What's the specially designed instruction what are you going to do to help my child that you're doing differently? What are the minutes of service and where are those minutes of service going to be delivered? The IEP should also focus on extra supports that your child might need, okay, to learn the same curriculum as everyone. So in general, children, once they get into school, are going to be exposed to that Indiana state standards, right? Even if they need to have in those earlier years some modification, they are still going to be exposed to general education curriculum. They're going to, that will always be first, and that will be foremost in their education, okay? So if a child can't keep up, that's addressed in the IEP, and these decisions are made by the case conference committee. The IEP can outline appropriate modifications and accommodations that can happen and can make it happen in a general ed setting. Also, it does not always have to be in a special education setting. So when you look at the IEP, you'll see location, and you want to have meaningful conversations about where is my child going to be educated at. Okay, understanding what percentage of the day is my child going to be in general ed. Now, sometimes there is a decision that the least restrictive environment for my child might be a self-contained classroom or for a period of the day, but that comes after present levels are looked at, goals are looked at, because goals drive that placement and what's the least restrictive environment that my child can learn in, can succeed in. Many times years ago, a child who might need some more significant assistance might have been in a whole separate residential facility. So we have to look at least restrictive environment for every single child, every single situation. But it is so important for a parent to understand that they are an integral part of the case conference committee, and that they can also come back and they can explain what their goals are, what they want to have happen to their child, for their child, as school is proposing a free and appropriate public education. So we're going to talk a little bit here about curriculum and grade level standards. I've mentioned that before. So the public school systems establishes the general curriculum or standards for each grade level, and the expectation is that every child should meet these standards. So if you have a child in third grade, then the law requires that your child have access to his or her grade level standards. So you will see, you can go to the DOE's website and put in Indiana academic standards, and it will come up with English, it will come up with math, it will come up with science, all of those, and you can click on those and you can read all about what a child in third grade is being taught for reading. And it really is important because that is actually what those goals tie back into, right? So if your child is at a grade level where they need to be learning algebra, but maybe they don't know how to add yet, then they would be looking at that grade level standard for algebra and how do we help teach the necessary components to be able to do that. Okay, so we're going to spend just a little bit of time on the performance standards. And I would encourage you to go to the Department of Ed's website and to look at those standards for your child's grade level. And then perhaps if your child is not on grade level, look to see what standards there are for the grade that you believe that they're at, right? And you can have those discussions about the specially designed instruction. What are things we can work on? How do we help work to close the gap? Okay. And you can find those on the Department of Education's website. So just some examples, a few of the third grade standards. With standard third grade geography would be label a map of the Midwest, identify states, major lakes, major rivers, and the Great Lakes. So this would be a component that they would be working on, okay? Now, that is the state standard. If they needed to work on a lower standard, they could take a look at working on that lower standard, but this would be what would be generally taught, right? So they might break this down. They might slow this down. Okay. And that would be an accommodation. Okay. When they're working on the grade level standard, they can still slow that down. And that's an accommodation compared to a modification, right? Where they actually change that standard. And they're working on like a first grade standard when the student's in third grade. Using a variety of resources to demonstrate an understanding of regional environmental issues and examine the ways that people have tried to solve these problems. So that's pretty big, right? That's a lot for a third grader. So having these discussions about what my child is learning, how are you teaching it? What's the specially designed instruction? And what are you doing for my child if they're not on grade level? So the performance standards let you know what the regular curriculum teaches. This is what your child should be learning and exposed to. So the question then becomes, how can we provide support, accommodations, or perhaps even modifications to the standard so that it's achievable for a specific child? Now, I did mention that when you come into high school, you're earning credits. If you do not earn credits, you're earning units. And so at high school, in order to get a diploma, there's not an option to modify. That student who cannot get the credit is working toward a unit, but they are still based on those standards. There are still academic requirements because all students should continue to be learning all the way through their education experience. And again, if he or she can't have full regular curriculum, can't learn all of this, how close can they get? Let's work on those goals to close the gap as much as possible. Okay. Remember, the further away a child gets from the standard, the further behind he or she may become. So when that work is modified, okay, that's something to have a discussion and understand. This is not grade level work. Okay. And it's very important for a parent to know whether their child is working on a grade level and being exposed to grade level standards, or if their work is being modified. So we're going to talk a little bit as we're winding down to the 6 principles of IDEA. You see them there, the free FAPE, okay, known as a free and appropriate public education, an IEP, that individualized education program, appropriate evaluation, okay, provides information about the student's educational needs that result from the student's disability. LRE, that's what we have been talking about this whole time, for the student to be educated with typical peers in the general ed classroom with same age peers as much as possible. One of the other components is procedural safeguards. That's the set of rules and procedures that define and protect schools, parents, and students, parents, and schools' rights. And I would encourage you to look over those. I would encourage you to read them. InSource is on the back of those procedural safeguards, as are many other organizations that are here to help. And I would encourage you to look through those. If you don't understand them, ask someone. What does this mean? If you're at a case conference and you don't know what that term means, stop the conference and ask. Be an active participant. Ask during the case conference. What did you put down for parent concerns? Could you read that goal for me again? And when you receive that IEP, look over it. Have an intentional conversation. Because the last point of this last principle is parent and students' right to participate. Okay, those are the 6 principles of IDEA. Okay, so we've already talked a little bit about the free and appropriate public education. Okay, we've talked about grade level standards. We've talked about the child receiving educational benefit. Okay, so FAPE is very much the cornerstone of addressing the educational needs of children and students with special needs. Excuse me. And its definition and IDEA begins by saying that FAPE means special education and related services. 1, that are publicly funded, meaning no cost to families, just as with other school children. 2, meet the standard of the state educational agency has set. And 3, include an education in elementary, middle, secondary. And 4, provided in keeping with the child's IEP, which is an individualized education program. So FAPE is saying that a child's education should be unique. They should have access to general ed curriculum and meet state standards, and that they should also gain educational benefit. Okay. And so that's not included in IDEA's definition of FAPE, but it has been included in recent guidance from the U.S. Department of Education, which has stressed how important it is that children with special needs receive educational benefit from their FAPE. Okay. And it is very true. We do want to think of what about appropriate. That means something different to different people. So we want to have that discussion. We talked a little bit about the IEP. Okay, I already mentioned it's going to have present levels. It's going to talk about how the disability affects the progress. There's going to have to be an area of eligibility out of the 13. There needs to be measurable goals, how the progress will be measured, special education and related services, and the student's LRE, or least restricted environment. On our website, you can find an annotated IEP, and that is basically the Indiana IEP, where the boxes are filled in about things that should be discussed. I believe we've already talked sufficiently about LRE, so that the child should be educated in their least restrictive environment. And the decision to change placement is a task of the case conference committee. And when being moved to a more restrictive environment, there needs to be some significant discussion about why the child goals cannot be achieved in the general education environment. Okay, that's separate classes, separate school, or placement other than general education. Only if education with same age peers cannot be achieved based on the nature and severity of the disability, and the case conference committee determines a student needs that setting. And that's Article 7, citation is 7-4210. Jill mentioned and I mentioned some accommodations. Okay, they maintain the targeted skill level. They don't change the grade level standard that's being taught. And they are intended to mitigate or eliminate the negative impact of the disability on the student's performance. Okay, so that's what an accommodation is. Okay, extra time to take tests. Okay, tests read to a student. Using manipulatives, drawings, or other ways to communicate, using a picture exchange system, allowing students to explain what they understand from a lesson rather than having to write it down. Those are some examples of accommodations. Accommodations on state testing. This is very important. So a student's IEP may describe additional accommodations that can be used during the school day, even when they exceed those allowable for state testing. But in general, think about if you need it on a state test, you're going to need it every day. Okay, so accommodations on the state tests are restricted to those expressly allowed by the test. So there are some accommodations that might not be allowed, okay, for a state test. And they must be provided routinely to the student as needed throughout the school year, not just for the test. And you can find on the DOE's website, the accommodation guideline, and that's what we send parents to. Go and read these accommodation guidelines, understand what it is. And then student must have the documented evidence of need.
Lisa,
yes.
I just want to point out that I have put a link to that accessibility guide for those accommodations in our chat box.
Thank you, Jill, so much. I appreciate it. So we're going to talk a little bit about modifications, and often people get very nervous about the discussion about modifications. They should not be confused with accommodations, okay, and keeping things on a skill level. So examples of modifications include only having to answer true or false, or being given perhaps only multiple choice questions on a very complex topic where the standard, this grade standard, expects things like comparative essays, completing math problems that require skills associated with a significantly lower grade level, or maybe they're reading a picture book when other students are reading a book that is more substantial. So when you look through the list of these accommodations, okay, list of modifications, you understand that this is changing or simplifying. It's reducing the complexity of the targeted skills, okay? But it may allow a student to be included in the general ed setting and participate in aspects of the general curriculum, okay, in an individualized way. So it is also important to have a discussion and to understand when your child is being taught modified work, because it is very important to understand, is there a modified grading scale, right? Where are they? What are they doing? And when are they being exposed to grade level curriculum? Okay. And are they going to be participating in Indiana's alternate assessment, or will they be participating in the standard assessment? The alternate assessment is IM, and the standard assessment that most children take is iLearn. Okay, very quickly here, because we are rounding up. We've only got 10 more minutes. We're going to talk a little bit. This is the LRE continuum. Okay, so the IEP must document the case conference committee's decision for what is the least restrictive environment for a student. Okay, students are to be separated only if the nature and severity of the disability requires the student to be separated from peers for progress to occur. Placement and services will look different for different students, and we've already talked about that, right? We've talked about where a child, the location they might get their services at. Maybe they will get speech in the general ed, or maybe they will go to a speech room for that. That's all part of your discussions, and in the IEP, it notes the location that services will be given, okay? Schools are able to meet a variety of students' needs with the flexibility of the IEP. This slide shows the range of the continuum of service. But note that schools are not required to provide all of these options in one building, okay? But just to ensure that they are available. So what that means is school doesn't have to have the type of placement that the CCC has determined the student needs, but the school must then move to send the student to the appropriate placement at the school's cost. And the citation for that is 7-42-10. Special classes, separate schooling or placement other than general ed occurs only if the education with the same age peers cannot be achieved based on the nature and severity of the disability. I know I've said that now several times, but it is very, very important to understand. And also note that homebound is the most restrictive environment, even more significantly restrictive than residential placement, as they are not with any child. So at times there have been an identifiable pattern of overuse of homebound services, and that needs to be a very meaningful, intentional discussion. And if you disagree with the proposal of FAPE, then you should avail yourself to speaking to your special ed director, having another meeting, or of course there's a whole dispute process if you disagree with the FAPE that's being offered. So that slide talked about general ed, resource room, self-contained classroom, separate classroom, hospital setting. So that's what's called the continuum. Okay, so in closing, so let's review. So we covered a lot. This has been a fairly heavy presentation, and we recognize that. We recognize where our children are educated is important, and it involves lots of emotion. So we wanted to look at the definition of inclusion and the research on inclusion. The research shows improved outcomes for typical students and students with special needs. And we are very thankful to Dr. Murphy and Dr. Cole for the research that they put out right here in Indiana. We've looked at the state rules and IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. We've looked at the fact that IDEA is the federal law and mandates special education services in the United States. We've talked about that Article 7 is our state law, and I've explained where you can get a copy of those, both on our website and DOE's website. We've reviewed the structure of IDEA and how that structure supports inclusion. And we've looked at the 6 key principles included in IDEA and how you can use these principles to support your case for your child being educated in the general ed classroom with their peers. Okay. We also would like you to know that we have a volunteer program for parents to come and help other parents. We have a whole training program. Our volunteers are vetted. They gain expertise, leadership skills, and more, and they have many opportunities to help families throughout the state. Some may want to attend case conferences. Some may want to answer phone calls. Some may want to help us by setting up at resource fairs. We value our volunteers, and if you're interested, you can find out more about that on our website. Lastly, please know that we have a social media pay opportunities. So please make sure that you visit our website, our Facebook page, our Instagram, our Twitter. Of course, Jill and I do these webinars 2 times a month. We have many webinars archived. We have a YouTube channel, and also our next webinar coming up has to do with social media and the influence on Indiana students. And we have covered issues such as bullying, youth suicide, mental health supports. We've also taken a look at organizations here in Indiana that help families, so that you could know what those are about, like First Steps in the Center for Deaf and Hard of Hearing, the ARC, and Family Voices. So also please note that you can find our direct numbers and our emails on our website. You can also find your special education liaison for your area. And at this point, I believe I'll turn it back over to you, Jill.
Thank you, Lisa. I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to post our QR codes again for those that maybe hadn't had a chance to utilize them. Please know that again, you can access them through the QR code so that you can sign into that training form, and you can have the survey. And we really greatly appreciate if you do fill out that survey. That is something that does help us to decide what we're doing good and maybe what we're not doing so good on our webinars. And then you also have the opportunity to get your certificate. I did want to reiterate that we will be having another webinar May the 18th, and it is going to be on social media and the influence it has on Indiana's students. So that one will be a very timely topic as well. At this time, I don't see any more, I don't see anything in the chat box. I don't see anything in our question and answer box. Yep, I don't have anything that's posted. Lisa, I would like to thank you so much for being my co-host today. That you are always such a thrill to have. We don't have anything that's even out on Facebook Live. So thank you, Jessica, for being here and monitoring Facebook for us. I appreciate that. So if there's no other questions or comments. Okay.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you for everything. And thank you all for attending.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Please have a wonderful day, and we will see you on May 18th, 1:30 p.m. to 3. And again, it will be on social media. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.